lot of tech companies are looking for interns. So I would highly recommend getting started that way. I see there's a question in the chat. You can go ahead.
Yeah, Ankit, you could go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So actually, I have a question here. May I know what's your name of that app that you have created?
Yes, the company that I've created is called Valence Vibrations. Our app is not currently commercially available, but it will be very soon.
Okay, and the second thing is like, actually I'm a undergraduate student, but the thing is that I'm not finding any opportunities related to neuroscience research. So if you don't mind, would you like to tell me what are the research opportunities that are available? Like as you have told, you were last time participated in a competition where you met people like professionals. I am also interested to working
Oh,
under them.
yeah. So I would say I'm not sure what part of the world are you in right now? What university
Actually,
are
I
you in?
belong to India. It's in Asia continent.
Okay, so I don't know much about the sort of neuroscience opportunities in India specifically. I do know Neurotech X is a absolutely great organization that students can create neuroscience or neurotechnology oriented clubs and chapters of Neurotech X at their school. And then Neurotech X sort of throws a ton of resources at you for how to participate in neurotech hackathons, for example, and how to even in some cases create apps and sort of neuro entrepreneurship things, and then gain access to research opportunities. So I would say that's your best bet. Unfortunately, I just can't give more specific information because I don't know much about the opportunities in India. I also would recommend getting involved with OpenBCI. They're an organization that enables students and sort of like individual researchers to try to create EEG technologies using their software. So you can create new sort of applications of EEG machine learning using the OpenBCI platform. And I know a lot of students have gotten involved in that as early as high school. So we definitely recommend that as well. Which organization am I talking about? Yes, so Neurotech X is the first one, and Open BCI.
Okay, looks great. Do you have any other follow-ups? Okay.
Yeah, actually, I have another question here. Can I ask?
Yes.
So yeah, like being an entrepreneur, I think you have already faced a lot of challenges in your initial stage when you have started. So how did you cope up with the, like how you feel always motivated? Because in what being an entrepreneur, when you started first time, there are a lot of challenges come. So
Yeah.
what are the things that you would like to give all of us if we wanted to start our own startup in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many challenges with starting a company, and even more starting a company while in school and while enrolled full-time in school. So I think the first thing that I would say is just don't give up. Being a female student founder, I had a lot of imposter syndrome going into it, feeling like, I was really excited about what I was doing and I knew a lot about the specific application that I was building, but I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of giants in this space when competing for funding or even just recognition in our idea or idea validation. It was very challenging at first to see us on a level playing field with PhDs and people that have been working on their technologies for 20, 30, 40 years. And so definitely, everyone has to start somewhere, and many of the best and most profitable companies today were started by people in our age demographic. So definitely don't doubt yourself and doubt your ability to contribute meaningfully even as a student. I think I've seen so many amazing companies spin out of the university setting, out of university labs, science labs, So that's sort of the first hurdle, is don't be your own hurdle in trying to, build your path to success. And then in terms of sort of logistically starting a company, I think going into it being so young and never having done this before, there were a lot of challenges with trying to figure out the logistics of how to actually file to create a C corporation in the United States, how to file with the IRS, how to build out a team, how to make sure that I have all of the right types of legal advice, filing patents. There's a whole host of other things, figuring out revenue streams and how to prioritize different types of marketing, and then actually building out the product and making sure that we had all of the right developers on our team to really cover the full gamut of thinking through the user experience and professionalism in the product. And then, there's the whole added hurdle of, fundraising and talking with venture capitalists to get funds to actually start your idea and fund the development before being able to sell it. So lots of challenges. There is, so much logistics that you just don't think about when you have the idea to start a company, that as soon as you get going, it seems insurmountable. But really taking the time to build out mentors that you trust and that really believe in you and your idea is the best piece of advice that I could give to undergraduate and high school students thinking about starting a company, a nonprofit, a high impact organization. Really, the mentors that we built in the past 2-3 years have been so instrumental in our success in helping us understand each step of the process. And this goes back to not getting in your own way. I think often as students, we feel shy or timid to reach out to people that are much later in their careers that have a lot of things going on, because we feel like, why would they answer us? But you can't let that fear stop you from reaching out, because so many professionals are really excited to mentor young students, especially young student entrepreneurs. And people feel very fulfilled when they feel like they can substantively help you and really see the impact their advice has on your success. So that is the best piece of advice I can give. In terms of how to do that, I would say LinkedIn is a really powerful tool for reaching out to people. If there's someone that you're really interested in connecting with and you don't really know how to reach out, or you feel like they won't respond if you send that first message, I would still send it, but getting an introduction to them from someone else that they know is also a really great way to get a response. Particularly starting with professors at your university or partnered universities is a really great way to start building mentors. And then once you have a couple, they will essentially try to connect you with their friends in tangential fields if they're not able to help you with specific advice. And so I started doing this probably 6 months into college, and the mentors that I made, a couple of years ago are still connecting me to other people today and giving me lots of advice on a continual basis. So trying to make mentors, build a relationship with them, and continue sort of updating them on your life and on your progress every couple of months is a great idea.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think Ankit, oh yeah, Zaid, you can go ahead.
If I may ask a question, what route do you recommend the best way to get into neuroscience?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
As a high schooler, what do you recommend to do to get neuroscience as a major?
Okay, so to just get into neuroscience and start sort of working that field, or getting into a university studying neuroscience?
Both, if you're okay.
Okay, yeah, so that's a big question, because as a lot of the people on this call know, getting into college is like a huge process. I would say when I was applying to neuroscience degree programs back in high school, I very much centered my application around neuroscience. And there were other things that I was doing that were related to neuroscience or related to sort of social impact organizations that really shone through on my application. I think not everyone has access to complete neuroscience research in high school or even take any sort of introductory neuroscience class. And so finding ways to virtue signal your influence on why you're excited about this field and sort of what specifically you're interested is really important on your application. I think a lot of people write very general essays where they don't give specific examples of research that they're really excited about. And those essays in which people feel that passion that you have for a subject, really anything, is really what helps you get in and stand out for colleges. So I would highly recommend that. But I think, in sort of the meantime, reading a lot of books written by neuroscientists and neurotechnologists is really what helped me sort of get an idea of where I wanted to go in neuroscience and what types of neuroscience I was interested in. The brain is a very, very complicated organ, and there are so many different types of research that you can go into, even if you want to stay in academia. And then outside of academia, there are a whole host of others. So trying to get a better understanding of what you're interested in is the first step. Applying to college is also sort of part of that vein that will help you with writing your application essays and make them much stronger if they can feel the passion that you have for really understanding specifically what you're interested in, even though it will definitely change. And then once you're sort of on that path and trying to get opportunities in high school or college, I would definitely recommend joining a research lab early. Typically, when you get into college, they'll recommend that you wait a semester or two to start research. I say if you're really excited about it, go for it. You don't have to wait if you don't want to, if that's something that you feel like you can handle. Getting involved in research early sets you up for a lot of other opportunities later on in the university setting that other people will have later if they started research later. So would definitely recommend that. In terms of opportunities in neurotechnology, I would say that most universities don't do a great job of making you aware of how much neuroscience opportunities there are out there outside of academia. They present it as something where if you're studying neuroscience, you're either going to be a doctor or you're going to go get a PhD in neuroscience and be a professor, a university researcher like our professors. But there's actually a huge segment of neuroscientists that are working for, as I said, big tech companies like Apple, Facebook, Google. There's also a whole bunch of neurotech companies that are creating brain-computer interfaces, computing, wellness, meditation apps, creating all kinds of other applications of neurotechnology that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you had only looked at the opportunities within academia. A great resource for actually learning more about what is out there in neurotechnology is NeurotechX. So I worked for a nonprofit called Brain Minds, which created this really, really long list. I actually helped lead this project to essentially detail all of the different types of neurotechnology that exist in industry, and a long list of, I think, over 2,000 companies that are actually neurotech companies all around the world. So I can find that link in a bit and actually add that into the chat. But
thank you.
I think that's a great place to start. A lot of them are looking for interns. They don't post intern opportunities or positions on their websites very often because most of them are pretty small. And so just emailing or connecting with someone on LinkedIn and saying that you're really excited about their technology, explaining exactly why you're excited and asking if you can have a meeting often prompts a later internship offer if that's something that you're interested in. So I would definitely recommend that you start reaching out to mentors or potential mentors in the fields that you're really interested in and let them know that you're looking for an internship or for a summer opportunity, and oftentimes they will offer or point you to one of their friends that's hiring. So that's my best advice for sort of getting positions like that. I'm seeing
Thank you.
Of course. In the chat, Ankit, that's how I pronounce your name, correct? Ankit. Yes, okay. So you asked if there were any good recommendations for books, blogs that I find useful or can help. So in terms of like websites, blogs, I would definitely recommend BrainMind, Neurotech X, and OpenBCI. And then also just looking at major neurotechnology companies like Neurable, Neurosity, drawing a blank on more, but Sanitary Magnetics. I can actually just create a list for you guys or send you the list that I've created already. But following a lot of neuroscience companies on LinkedIn and just looking at their websites and joining their mailing list will also give you a very good indication of opportunities at each of those companies, the state of neurotechnology, and sort of where we're going into the future. A lot of the companies on the list that I was just describing do have some sort of mailing list, blogs. They have developer platforms for some of them where you can actually enter hackathons yourself as a student. So I would definitely recommend doing that. In terms of books, there are a whole lot of books that I recommend. I would say top of head, David Eagleman has a really great introduction to neuroscience. It's called The Brain. He's written, I think, around 8 books. This is the CEO of Neuroscience, which is the company that we entered the initial hackathon challenge of. I would definitely recommend reading David Eagleman. And then, yes, I can. And then I would be happy to send more of a detailed list after this. I have a whole list of books that are currently on my shelf. So yeah, I would be happy to do that. And then, do you want to read the next question? Whoever asked, is it Lasia? Do you want to read your question?
I guess you could go ahead.
Okay. So you're interested in which major programs of study I would recommend if interested in pursuing a career in neurotech. So I would say that neuroscience is very customary, as is computer science. So a growing need that we're seeing in the field right now is more computer scientists actually working in neurotechnology with an understanding of the brain. And so I would definitely recommend neuroscience, computer science, but also tangential fields like psychology, statistics, neuropharmacology is important. So sort of the pharmacology aspect. A lot of people are just studying basic biology or quantitative biology. So there are really a whole host of fields that you could go into. Chemistry is a big one, as is material science, particularly for creating medical devices that are going to be interacting with the brain. Material science becomes very important whenever you want to create any sort of implants or something like that. So that's what I would recommend, but honestly, anyone can be a neurotechnologist. I know people that didn't, weren't trained in a traditional science degree, but did end up going into neurotechnology just because of the path that they took in the industry after college. So anyone can be a neurotechnologist, but there are sort of traditional paths within neuroscience and computer science that I would say a lot of people take.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you, Chloe. Do we have any other questions in the chat?
It looks like Ankit also asked if we can connect afterwards. Yeah, I'd be happy to put my email in the chat in case anyone has any lingering questions. And then also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to provide any more special advice on a later call, and then even like connect you with anyone that you're interested in meeting that you can see on my connection list. So definitely reach out if you're interested, or have any other questions about how I got started. Yeah, I can also drop my LinkedIn URL.
All right, that's great. I guess all the questions in the chat are answered. Now let's talk more about COVID. So you're the co-founder and COO of Hopehearted, which distributes COVID sanitary supplies to unhoused people in the Bay Area, right? So how did that come out to be? And could you explain more about your journey through this venture?
Yes, so Hopehearted was a nonprofit that I started right at the beginning of the pandemic, I would say, maybe around May of 2020. And the beginnings of this idea actually started when I was back in high school a couple of years later, or prior. And I had created a hospitality and patient advocacy group called the Sunshine Cart at a local hospital in San Jose, where I grew up all throughout my childhood. And this was trying to help low-income and unhoused patients in the hospital gain access to the supplies that they needed while in the hospital and also after they were discharged, but also advocate for the patients in the hospital if they felt that their care their care concerns weren't really being addressed, or their care wasn't where it needed to be in terms of making sure that they felt supported by the staff. And so we served as an advocacy group that was helping advocate for patients that felt that they were being neglected. This was a very struggling hospital that had gone through bankruptcy a couple of times. And so we wanted to make sure that the patients were being adequately supported throughout all of these changes. And so through that experience, we became very close as a team with the unhoused population that was in San Jose, and got to know a lot of the challenges that they faced in gaining access to health supplies and just, improving their health in general. A lot of people would come into the hospital with walking pneumonia. They'd be treated for a day or two, and then they would be essentially sent back onto the street to never recover from that pneumonia, because it's very hard to get rid of the fluid buildup if you're living on the street in the cold with no access to a warm bed and warm food and things like that. So that was a big need that we noticed. After I went to college, I left this program in the hands of some of the volunteers that I had trained to work with me on the Sunshine Cart. And that ran for about a year until COVID started, and this program had to be shut down because they weren't allowing any more volunteers into the hospitals anymore because of the surge. And so I came home from college at this time and sort of reconnected with the group that I had been working with, and really wanted to help address this pandemic in unhoused populations in the area that we had been serving in a different way since the program had been shut down. One of my friends and former peers had been collecting supplies that the hospital didn't need anymore and couldn't use because of regulations about how long you can keep hand sanitizer or socks in the warehouse before getting rid of it. But these were still perfectly good supplies, and she had been donating them to another food bank that she was working with and also volunteering at for a couple of years. And so that was sort of how Hopehearted started. She was donating unused supplies to essentially reallocate them to unhoused people that needed them. And we started doing that, gaining access to excess supplies at hospitals. And then we sort of created a formal nonprofit to try to create COVID PPE and sanitary supply kits to pass out to unhoused people. We started by partnering with food banks and shelters in San Jose, Fremont, and other local Bay Area locations, and later sort of transitioned to passing out at more encampments because we noticed that there was more of a need to help the people that weren't regularly going to food banks because they might not have known about the resources that they had available and had been further marginalized by the state programs that were available. So we sort of focused or shifted our focus towards people in parks that were living in tents and things like that to make sure that they were really gaining access to the supplies they need. We were also sharing a lot of resources about food banks and cooks in the area that were distributing food to unhoused people that they could gain access to, as well as shelters, employment services, clothes, etc. So I've been working on this now for about 2 years, and I'm really proud to have helped over 3,000 unhoused people sort of gain access to new supplies. We have since expanded to include high school chapters. So I think we have around 6 high school chapters from different schools in the Bay Area that are helping us distribute and fund kits right now. And so that's been really great because we've been able to help a lot more people, even as we've been in college, as COVID has sort of sent students home from college and then brought us back and then sent us home, as I know a lot of you are also dealing with. So we've been able to have very consistent supply distributions because of the help of these high schoolers.
That sounds great. It's very important for us to help out one another during these tough times, right? So
Definitely. Thank you.
great to have you. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. So going back to Valence Vibrations and your work there, you talked more about how you need to help emotional connections with people from different cultures and help people on the autism spectrum with ADHD, etc. So how do you think neurodiversity is so important in today's world, and why do we need it so much?
Yeah, I appreciate this question because I think this is something that is not in our collective consciousness as much as it should be. Neurodiversity is essentially the idea that there are lots of different types of brains, and having a formal diagnosis of autism or ADHD does not make your brain or your sensory processing system any less valid, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to change the way that you're interacting with people because you're receiving information differently. So a great analogy that a lot of people in the neurodiversity movement use is the processing system of iOS versus Android. A lot of people might have a preference and comparing, what phone they like better. But essentially, these are two phones that do very similar things, but process information slightly differently and are just working differently. But there isn't one that is more or less valid as a cell phone than the other one. Autistic and neurodivergent people don't want to be treated as though there is something wrong with them or that there is a stigma associated with having, heightened sensory perception, for example, or communicating in a more direct way. And there are a whole host of other differences that don't necessarily change someone's, validity or humanity in existing in the way that they are. And so as a pro-neurodiversity company, we want to make sure that we are honoring and celebrating neurodiversity and helping people who are different communicate and understand the emotions of people that they're communicating with in a bi-directional way without putting all of the burden of struggling in communication on the disabled or neurodivergent person. So that's really the key of what we're doing. I think right now people are starting to understand more that, autism and ADHD are not diseases or disorders that need to be treated and cured, but rather neurotypes that need to be supported in a slightly different way using different tools. And so neurodiversity to me means meeting each person in their brain where they're at and creating technologies and even just treating them in the way that best helps them feel supported, even if that means something slightly different for each person. And so we've been really proud and excited to learn so much from the neurodiversity movement and all of the advocates and activists around us that have really helped us understand how to best support differences and how to celebrate them in a way that makes everyone feel like they are equally valid and we're not stigmatizing or prioritizing any one communication framework. Something that we've learned a lot sort of initially is the importance of language. So a lot of people outside of the neurodiversity movement assume that person first language is actually the preference of neurodivergent people, but we've actually since learned that most disabilities and disability movements and neurodiversity movements prefer identity first language, saying autistic person rather than person with autism, deaf person rather than person with deafness, etc. And this is because you can't separate the person from their identity, just as you wouldn't say person with femaleness or person with tallness. You know, that is a tall person. It is intrinsically a part of who they are. And by trying to falsely separate those two things, you're denying them an aspect of their humanity that is important to their identity. And so we've learned a lot about sort of different movements and language that is preferred with each movement by really leaning into the community and listening to the advocates that are telling us how they need to be spoken about and the ways in which to best support these communities.
That's great. I'm sure that it inspired all of us to use more inclusion and not ostracize people who are neurodiverse from society. So do we have any further questions in the chat? You can unmute as well if you can't type it out. Okay, so I have one question. They're asking about what imposter syndrome is and what you were talking about then.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, I'm glad. I hope that if you didn't know the term, you haven't experienced it. Imposter syndrome is where you feel like you are an imposter in a room full of people that, you know, deserve to be there more than you should, essentially. And it's very common for marginalized communities, people that are first generation low income college students, for example, often report a lot of imposter syndrome getting into college, where they feel like people aren't respecting them in the way that they deserve to be respected as an equal member of that community, but also feel a lot of self-doubt that they are, you know, struggling to be on the same level of the people around them, even when they are, and even when they deserve to be in the room. So imposter syndrome is essentially feeling like an imposter that doesn't belong there and just accidentally got into whatever program, college, room that you were in. And it's really important to know that you are there because you deserve to be there, and you are not there accidentally. And you deserve the recognition that comes associated with getting into that school or whatever that room might be.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. Do we have any further questions? Okay, if not, then we can wrap up this session. It's been 1 hour since we started. So thank you so much for all the participants to come here. I'm sure we all learned a lot from Chloe. And thank you so much to Chloe for participating and sharing your knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you all for attending. Feel